Hi, I'm Kristen, and I don't know where my grandma is. Dun dun dun! Intro. Before we get into any of it, I would like to acknowledge the fact that I am dressed up for this video, and appreciate the fact that I will be working with a white substance that will forever stay in my clothes. So we're gonna change into something a little more safe. Et voila! A nice, comfy, ratty old hoodie that has already seen years of artistic abuse. Okay, first things first, we're gonna peel this sticker. It's on the back here. And oh, look at that! That came off so easy. Okay, so as I said, I'm Kristen. Today I am gonna start working on this definitely a long time project, which is building something out of this castle. I bought this castle at Michael's. Now, you may not have been wondering, but I'll wonder for you. Why did I buy this castle? I had just finished... Cool. I had just finished a semester of college where I was kind of being put through the grind in terms of creative projects. So I wanted to, treat myself to a successful semester. I got straight A's. With a little project that is purely self-indulgent. I have no aims for this other than pleasure. Now, as for what I will be doing with this castle, what sort of touch-ups I'll be doing to it right now, I have no plans. But what I do know is I will be gessoing the entire thing. I don't think this is going to do the whole thing, but it should definitely get the exterior finished. Now, when I was a kid, my maternal grandfather, he had this beautiful dollhouse. It was fully furnished. I guess I'll just pour it on. No. I know there's a better way. There we go. There we go. And now we load the brush. He had this beautiful dollhouse. It was fully decked out, fully furnished. It had wallpaper, paintings, little lamps, fainting couches, people that lived in it. There were little plants in the front. The style was very, Gilded Age New York, like the, roughly the 1890s. Like, think about that kind of style. And I was not allowed to play with it. And I found out why when I broke some of the shit that was in it when I played with it when nobody was looking. Okay, to get to what I'm doing here. So I don't know where my paternal grandmother is. It's kind of a mystery. Now, the events of discovery that I'm going to share with you in this video, they're going to be a little bit out of order, but it should all culminate in a clear timeline. I'm going to try to tell this story in a chronological order that makes the most sense. So, at the time I'm filming this, my father died 9 years ago. He's now completely unavailable for answers. Dying with him was any more sort of knowledge from his end on what had happened to his mother, my grandmother. Now, in the beginning, I was told very little about his mother. He never talked about her. All I knew about her was that he had one. And that she had walked out on him and his father and his younger brother when he was very young. And I didn't even know that until I was maybe 14. What was absolutely definitely sure is that she had left. He never heard from her again, and that he didn't even know her name. In fact, like around the time that I like heard the story, it was because he needed a copy of his birth certificate, and he hadn't visited his hometown uh, in many, many years. Um, so he kind of used his needing to get a new birth certificate as a reason to just kind of, uh, haunt old halls, so to speak. Several years after my father died, I got an email for a free trial to Ancestry.com, and I just said, what the hell. Filling out the basic info, when it got to the part of, who are your grandparents? And that's when I remembered I knew nothing about my father's mother. So I'm scoping through Ancestry.com to fill in just as many blanks as I could. I really didn't know a lot about my father's side of the family, but luckily it seems like I've got a lot of cousins who are kind of doing that work for me. I learned some really cool things. I learned where my family came from when they came to the United States. The fact that I am a, great plus whatever niece of a very problematic, long dead American president. There is no method to this madness right now. I'm just kind of stroking the brush. But what was distressing me was the fact that my paternal grandmother was a total ghost. I found a lot of information on my father and his father. I found army records, residency records, census reports. She was a total ghost. And then one day I got lucky and I managed to find a marriage certificate. And then there was what I could only assume to be her name. I honestly, for a long time, I had doubts this was even her name, because this was the only record of proof I had that this woman even existed. And what was especially frustrating was that her name was in initials. Right there, my father's name, name of groom, there it is, and the name of bride, initial, maiden name. And what was frustrating is that her middle name, it's not, uncommon, but it's fairly common enough to make searching for her difficult. It wasn't, Smith, but it's the kind of surname that you've heard before. But the fact of the matter was, I had a name. There was a name, so I actually had something to type into the search engine. Nada. Nothing. No census, no alternate form of the marriage certificate, my father's birth certificate, couldn't find anything. And you might be asking, why didn't you look at your father's birth certificate? I didn't have it. He had died, and his wife at the time had kept that stuff. And she and I were not on speaking terms. Now, I had made my sister aware of the fact that I was doing this, because I'm sure, she would have been interested, and she was, and she actually had something to share with me. My former stepmother, my father's widow, gave a box of his records to my sister. She had it. She had my father's birth certificate. So she dug up the box, we found the stuff, and lo and behold, there was her name, non-initialed. First name, middle name, maiden name, right there. I was like, oh my god, finally, okay, now I should have, more success in tracking this woman down. Once again, nada. It was very disheartening that I couldn't find any record of this woman anywhere, that I started building theories as to why I couldn't find her. Starting with the fact that, she left, her husband and her two children, my father and my uncle. What if the name on the birth certificate wasn't her real name? What if this woman had all kinds of issues, or, some sort of dark mystery surrounding her, only making, my thirst to find out what happened to her, even stronger. However, friends and neighbors, there was more. In this box of stuff that my sister had was also a wedding album. And it was like a journal about the wedding that my grandmother filled out. She wrote about the night before. She wrote about the bachelor party and the bachelorette party. Apparently there wasn't one. You see, on top of all the other issues from my father's side of the family, they're Mormons. My father was a Mormon, my mother is a Catholic, so naturally I became atheist. Yeah, so for his bachelor party, he just kind of spent a quiet night in playing card games. Which, I mean, hey, no hate. I'm not like a big, party person myself. But, just recalling the fact that he was Mormon, just kind of adds a certain layer. There were photos. There were photos of her in her dress, him in his tux, them standing, in front of, where they got married. If I recall, they got married at the house. My grandfather's family home. That's where they got married. And tucked away in the pages of this wedding journal was her mother's death certificate. I've finally had another piece to the puzzle. I also found a page in the journal where she names both of her parents, because there's like a cute little family tree page, like here's the groom, here's the groom's parents, here's the bride, here's the bride's parents, and she named them. She wrote their names, and for whatever reason, she and then eventually my father ended up with her mother's death certificate. Like wipe off the magnet here. Sorry, if you're wondering why I'm painting the, front again, it had dried and was looking a little thin, so I'm just applying a second layer. It's probably not helping that I'm doing this kind of, haphazardly. I'm just kind of going with what I feel, not so much technique. So yeah, I'm like, great, more pieces to the puzzle. Let me type in those names. And lo and behold, nada. Kidding. No, legit. I found them. I found her parents, my great-grandparents. Suddenly, I'm finding birth certificates, wedding announcements, marriage licenses, residency reports, and most interestingly, census records. There were many census records for my paternal great-grandparents on my grandmother's side. There's gotta be a word for that. Yeah, from the pieces I was able to put together, they've married at fairly typical of the time ages, he was older than her, fairly young, and they had many kids. I'm talking like, I think it was like 15 kids. All of their names plastered along the census records. All of their names, except hers. Literally every single census record I found, and there were many. They seemed to move around a lot, like all across the country, but mostly in the Midwest to the West Coast. All of the kids' names were listed on every single one. Some of them missing because of, some of the kids having not been born yet. Every kid listed except her. Somehow this woman had picked up the career of being a total ghost from the very beginning. Learning this was just so frustrating and disheartening. I couldn't understand how this could happen. And then I returned to my theory. Maybe this wasn't her real name. The name on her wedding license and my father's birth certificate. Maybe this isn't who she actually is. Maybe she put down a false name. Maybe she's posing as a dead woman. Who knows? Because this was also, the late 50s, early 60s. You could get away with that shit a lot easier back then. So I only have the most basic subscription to Ancestry.com because I'm broke but determined to learn about her. However, at some point I got frustrated enough, and there was a roadblock I kept hitting, which was newspaper clippings. If the article wasn't clipped and posted as an image by another member of the website, I could not read that article. I would get blocked because you had to have a subscription to newspaper.com in order to be able to read it. Well, I eventually got frustrated enough that I just went and got a free trial to newspaper.com and then typed in her name. And I got precisely one result. Newspaper.com had archived a page from the local paper of where my father and his family lived. And on that page was my grandparents' wedding announcement. It had their names, it had the exact address of their old house, because this is a newspaper from 1961, and it was a small, farming town, so you could get away with that. And I Google mapped the address. I looked it up. It's not there anymore. It's no longer a house. It's now a shopping district. I believe it's like a barbecue restaurant now, or rather it's the back of a barbecue restaurant. There's nothing at that address anymore. But it was pretty interesting to look up. Anyway, and as is typical with wedding announcements, if any of you had seen that movie, 27 Dresses, wedding announcements include little personal blurbs of the betrothed's or newlyweds' lives, their history. It talked about my grandfather, where he was working at the time and where he lived and where he went to high school. And it also mentioned that my grandmother had graduated from high school only just earlier that spring. And it named the high school. I looked up the high school. The high school is still there. It is still very much standing and active with a fully functioning website. But I knew I wasn't going to get the answers I needed from there. Now that I knew exactly when she graduated high school. Oh, I forgot to mention this. So, looking at my father's birth certificate, I don't know why this was on there, but his parents' ages were listed on there. Their ages, though, not the exact date of their birth. And what was really distressing and gross to me was that my grandfather was 35 and my grandmother was 19. They got married in the Midwest in the fall. She had only just graduated from high school that spring in California. Somehow, right after graduating high school in California, she made her way over to a small farming town in the Midwest, only a few months later, and married my grandfather, who lived in this farming town his entire life. It started painting a picture in my head that this young woman, soon as she got out of high school, got the heck out of town, moved to the middle of nowhere. And when I mean the middle of nowhere, if you drive past this town And I have once. If you blink, you miss it. And this was in the mid-2000s, so if it was small then, I can't even imagine how small it must have been, in the year of 1961. But yeah, got all the way out there, and then married a guy only a handful of months later. Married, not even engaged, fully married. And I didn't know, looking at the dates of my father's birth and their wedding, this was not a shotgun wedding. He would have been conceived, even though he was born, within the next year, there was still, enough of a gap that she could not have been pregnant at the time of the wedding. No, too much time had passed in order for that to be possible. So, what could have driven her to want to do that is what's so strange to me. It's also, why I want to, find her. What's sad? I don't even know if she's still alive. I don't know if she's alive or dead. It is feasible that she could be alive. She was only 19 when she gave birth to my dad. She could be alive. But yeah, I digress. So yeah, she had named the high school she had graduated from, and I went to classmates.com. Because I knew classmates.com kept records of yearbooks. And wouldn't you know it, the oldest yearbook that classmates.com had was the year that my grandmother presumably graduated. I scoured every page. It was a small yearbook. Went straight to the letter of her last name. Not there. Not satisfied, I looked at every single page. I knew what she looked like. There was a photo of her in her wedding gown. In her wedding album. But she was nowhere to be seen. Once again, it just kept driving this idea that my grandmother must not be who she said she was. That she picked a fake name. I even looked for a not pictured section. They didn't have one. She just wasn't there. Not even under a different name. Her face just was nowhere in there. Now, I had reason to believe that it was still possible that she could have gone to that high school because there was a residency record of her older brother living in that area. So it could have stood to reason that she also lived in that area and went to that high school. So, out of desperation, I emailed the secretary of the high school. Told him the story, why I was, digging through their old yearbooks. Because I even tried, the next year thinking, maybe they've got it wrong, but nope. Because it would have thrown the timeline off anyway. And I just told him, all I want to know is, did this woman of this name go to your school? Now, at the time I am recording this, I have not received an answer. So, right now, that's a dead end. Now, about a couple months ago, my mother was visiting, and I had updated her on my little treasure hunt, and she told me something I had never heard before. So you may have recalled me briefly mentioning that I have an uncle, that my father has a brother, presumably my grandmother's second child. Well, apparently, when they were both young men, mid to late 20s, his mother had reached out. She wanted to reconnect, and my father said no. He didn't want to talk to her. He didn't want anything to do with her. Well within his rights. And I learned a little bit more of the story. So apparently, my grandmother suffered from mental illness. Apparently, she was prone to pulling the occasional disappearing act. She would just come and go, like all the time. Have some sort of breakdown or other, disappear for a while, then come back, and then it would just happen all over again. Which, I'd like to take a second to analyze that. Because remember, if she was telling the truth about anything, and looking at the photos, there is a detail that, does hold water. She was 19 when she gave birth to my father. And we're assuming that she was still 18 at the time she married my grandfather. Had only just graduated high school and rushed right into a marriage and having a baby right after. And then another baby only a couple years after that. And the age gap between her and my grandfather was huge. Huge. We're talking approximately like 16 years. And this isn't, a 45-year-old marrying a 61-year-old, two adults that, have established lives. This was a very young woman, fresh out of high school, marrying a very grown man. So my heart breaks for her, understanding that she was suffering mentally, most definitely emotionally. And it sucks that she felt there was no other recourse than to abandon her children. For that, my heart will always break for my father. That he never really knew or understood his mother. That for whatever reason, she couldn't stay for him. Now, I do want it said that there are times when it's understandable that a biological parent feels they cannot handle the responsibility of raising the person they created. Because there are so many women out there that have this fate, forced upon them. That feel that they have no other option for the sake of the child than to release their custody. And it just makes me sad that that seemed to be the case with my grandmother. That for whatever reason, she felt that she was ill-fit to be a mother. And for reasons that are surely justified, my father carried that hurt with him. The sting of abandonment. To the point that apparently when she had reached out to him, when he was an adult, he rejected her. Okay, now here is the piece of information I was saving for last. The breakthrough. Actually, more like the start of a breakthrough. So, as I said in the beginning, most of this story of, how I discovered certain things were kind of told a bit out of order. Or rather, it wasn't exactly sequential. A lot of this stuff was, all kind of happening at the same time. Simultaneously, that was the word. So, Ancestry.com has a DNA kit. And some time ago, I can't recall what her motivations were for doing it, but some time ago, my sister did the DNA kit. She was like, "You want my login info?" I was like, "Yeah." So Ancestry.com, when you do the DNA kit, they break down your results by parent. They let you know who else has used the DNA kit that share, the same DNA as you, or rather are related to you based on the DNA results. And I saw the most incredible thing that gave me the most hope out of everything in my search at that point. There were people listed on my father's side of the family that had the same last name as my grandmother. Now, remember at the beginning, I said the name wasn't, uncommon. It was fairly common. It's a very typical white name, but there was no way that this was a coincidence. This had to confirm that this woman, as I've already described her, this ghost of a woman, had to be my grandmother, and this had to be who she was. So with full access to my sister's account, I looked at the family trees of all the people listed with that last name. And they were all second and third cousins. So, clearly very closely related. So I'm looking at these family trees and I'm seeing names that I had seen before. Names that my grandmother had claimed to be her relatives. There were certain people whose great-grandmother was my great-grandmother. It was an incredible feeling to know that this woman, my grandmother, was a real woman. That her name is her name. The people she claimed were her parents were in fact her parents. And remember, she had siblings. They had 15 kids. Well, those siblings, they had kids. And they had kids. My cousins. My sister reached out to several of them, and so did I. And almost every single one of them had never heard of my grandmother. Their parent was either, a great uncle or a great aunt, and had never heard of her, the woman who would have been their great aunt. Until finally, I came to a couple of cousins who had heard of her. I learned that growing up, she went by her middle name. She didn't go by her first name, she went by her middle name. Getting that piece of information, and I felt so silly not realizing it, I looked her up on Ancestry.com by her middle name. Voila, one result. A census report with her listed there as one of the children, but under her middle name. Finally, even though it was, again, just the one result, it was more proof that she was real, that she had a life, that she had family, that there were people she came from before she gave birth to my father, that there is a story there, one I could potentially, learn. And unfortunately, what was heartbreaking was something I came to learn from a cousin that I've recently been in contact with. She is the granddaughter of my great uncle, sorry, let me break it down more simply. My grandmother's older brother, or oldest. I was talking to the granddaughter of my grandmother's oldest brother. And unfortunately, he passed away. He passed away a few years ago. But he had talked about his family. I am now going to share with you the full timeline of my grandmother's life, as far as I know it. She was born to a pretty big but very poor family that lived out in the Midwest. And they moved around a lot because their father was constantly looking for work. However, tragedy struck. When my grandmother was only 14 years old, both of her parents passed away. Now, her parents died, at a pretty young age to die. It's my understanding that they both suffered from some pretty intense illnesses. And unfortunately, they left a lot of children behind. Now, my grandmother, I forgot like exactly what her placement was in the siblings, but she was like, the older half. She was like, in the first half of kids born. And remember, she was only 14. So a lot of young kids were left behind, and it had become up to her oldest brother, who at the time was 20, to raise all those kids. Well, it seems alcoholism is frickin' genetic. I've mentioned it. I'm not sure if I've ever mentioned it before, but my father was an alcoholic. I don't really know his father's habits, but my grandmother apparently was a big alcoholic, as was her brother, and as was their parents. They like barely lived sober. Well, she and her older brother, the new paternal figure in the family, would get drunk all the time and just fight. She resented having to take orders, basically from a sibling. She felt that he had no right to tell her what to do. So, as soon as she graduated high school, she got out of there. She dipped. And the family never heard from her again. When she dipped after high school, that was it. They never knew what became of her. They didn't even know she got married and had kids, let alone grandkids. A fact that my newly found cousin, who I'm now friends with on Facebook, was delighted to learn, because she was also trying to, fill in the gaps of the family tree. So I want you to now picture this. A young woman who lost her parents at a young age, who was already going through, so much, being raised by her brother, probably had to have a hand in, raising the younger kids as well, turned 18, graduated from high school, and got the fuck out of there. I remember she went to high school in California, suffering from, at the time, what I'm sure had to be undiagnosed, suffering from mental illness and alcoholism, moving to the Midwest, met a man roughly twice her age, and married him within months of meeting him. I keep thinking about what could have driven her to do that. That I'm wondering, maybe she was looking for, security in the way any woman does, especially a woman of that time period, a young woman who, had nothing. But yeah, married a man who, by my understanding from stories told to me by my father, she married a man who was not emotionally sensitive by any stretch of the imagination. My father felt that his father loved him and raised him with all the best intentions. He raised his children wanting them to grow up to be good men. Honest men. He wanted them to be honest and hardworking men. He wanted them to have dignity and morals. But he was also a he was also a dad in the 60s, so he was a farmer, he was a Mormon, so a man like that, a man from the stories my father told, having a wife that suffered from manic episodes and alcoholism, I'm sure it was not a very pretty marriage. So, who knows, maybe that was the reason, maybe it was that reason plus other reasons, whatever it was, whatever her, reasons. How many times can I say that word? Whatever they were, she felt she had enough that she couldn't live the way she did. That after apparently several times being instituted or just leaving until she felt that she could try again. After doing that, who knows how many times, she decided this just wasn't going to be the way she was going to live her life. And then left for good. Not unlike the way she did before with her siblings. Apparently the years go by, a couple of decades. She makes the choice to reach out to her children. I don't know if my uncle connected with her. I don't talk to my uncle. I don't really know him. In fact, I never really did know him. I only met him one time. My father doesn't have a lot of fond memories of his childhood. Well, no, I take that back. He has fond memories, but the way he would talk about it, I knew he wasn't happy. He hated that life. And he did so many things in order to have a different life. And one of those things was apparently not talking to his brother for 14 years. And then after that one reunion, decide, no thanks. But yeah, sorry, I kind of went on a tangent there. But yeah, I don't know my uncle. So, I don't know how I could reach out to him, if I even want to know what he knows about my grandmother. And sadly, that is where that story ends. I don't know what happened to my grandmother. I hope to revisit this topic one day, you know, with some sort of update, some sort of breakthrough. But the fact of the matter is, it's a very firm and closed mystery. And if you would like to support this channel and help it grow, there are several ways you can do that. There are, of course, the traditional ways, liking, commenting, and subscribing. But there is also my Patreon, my merch store, my coffee, and my wish list. Any contribution helps. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.